G'day, I'm Kate Grarock. How are you? I am talking about episode 5 of Alone Australia. I normally do hiking videos, but I'm doing these little recaps as the season airs. So this episode follows along day 8, 9 and 10, and we have, I think, 6 people remaining. And we start out here with Chris, and Chris is definitely on that up and down train, and I love the way he talks about the beauty of nature and enjoying it, but the issue for him is that he's missing food and he can't do the amazing nature healing work that he wants to do when all his little tummy's thinking about his food. And then he's pretty much sitting there thinking, oh, I'm going to leave. That's sort of what we're feeling like. And then he's like, I need a sign. And then boom, he gets a fish on the line, and you see him there. He's, just absolutely changes his mood, his ability to embrace where he is once he gets some food. I think most people so far, we see them kind of happy, and then they just poof. You see that happiness and joy and upset, comes in and they're gone. And the coolest thing I'm seeing with Chris here is that he's having those ups and downs, but he's just riding those waves. And that's, I think, in terms of watching, it's really exciting to watch. We also see Chris have a nice little swim there, and it's quite interesting to see all those mud plumes that sort of kick up as he's walking out into the water. And then we flick over to Gina, the moss queen, and she's having issues with her legs. And I love Gina. I love the way she pictures it. She's like, look away now if you don't want to see a 52-year-old woman's legs. And holy moly, she's got her skin is all irritated, and she's saying that it's probably from wearing so many layers, and I certainly had issues with this too. I guess in our normal worlds where we're cleaning more, we're running around the house naked or whatever it is, wearing all those layers constantly, certainly for me, wool started to really irritate my skin. And yeah, her poor legs just look really, really hammered. Probably my favorite shot of the whole series so far is where she's like, I'm pretty sure she's not wearing knickers and she's just wearing a long shirt, and she sits down in front of the camera, and you see her sort of like doing these looks up and down and be like, oh yeah, good, I'm not flashing the world. I'm loving also watching Gina's shelter. It's sort of this really thick, she's looks like she's got a lot of insulation happening on the shelter there, and I guess that will help with her not having a sleeping bag. And she gets out the bush loom. Oh my god, I've always seen those in bushcraft books. We're day 8, day 9, and her strategy has been not to worry about food at all. She's happy to go into ketosis, and she's just going to focus on her shelter and making her life out there comfortable. And I think that's really cool. The other really interesting thing we see with Gina is she's got this pair of pants that didn't fit her, and her friend stitched that thing in there. And she's showing that she's starting to get them closer and closer. And she estimates that she's lost 7 kilos. And that's a little bit scary, and that must be quite alarming for her. And I think that's where we see her switch to, I'm going to start focusing on food a bit now because this is getting serious. I think that was another interesting part of the alone experience, is not knowing how much weight you've lost, but you can feel it in your body, you can feel it in your belt buckle getting, going up a notch. And so I found that quite challenging to know I was losing weight, but not understand what my weight was, because I guess I know personally my weight was a little bit heavier when I went in, and I know what would be a healthy weight for me, but it was really hard for me to judge, am I a good weight, am I not a good weight? So it'll be interesting to see how that affects Gina, if she probably just kicks into gear and says, okay, I'm going to catch food, boom, out she goes and gets some food, knowing Gina. We see this beautiful scene of Gina toying with her why. Why is she there? Is she there to be the first woman? And she's like, obviously, that'd be amazing. But she starts to narrow down and like, why am I here? I believe she wants to show that we can live in harmony with nature. And that just really resonates with me. And it's definitely something that's dear to my heart. So I'm loving watching Gina. I can't wait for the next episode. Then we jump over to Dwayne, and we see him surfing on his logs, and he's talking about missing surfing, and he's doing that cool slide along the logs that we've all seen on the ads, and it's like, oh gosh, is he going to hurt himself? And I was certainly a little bit tense watching that, but I think he's just having some fun, and that's always nice to find an outlet out there. Dwayne goes through a bit of an explore to this other fishing site where there's no snags, and it looks like a cracker of a site that he's found there. He goes back there a second time, and he's still fishing, trying, hoping that the calorie expenditure of getting there is going to pay off. And you can see the sort of the teetering, oh, what am I doing? is it going to work? Is it not? And then boom, he lands the fish, hikes back, and you see the mood's lifted. He's having difficulty lighting that fire. I think it came up something like he spent an hour and a half, or hour and 20 minutes trying to get that fire to start. And that, oh man, I've been there. That feeling, it was so weird out there. You'd have your tinder in such a dry place and such a, you protect it like, your nest egg, have it in your shirt pocket. And no matter what, I guess it was just so humid out there. It was still moist and it was so hard to get a light. I think it was one of my favourite lines from Dwayne. Is like, I shove this tinder up my ass if it means getting it dry. And like the frustration of that fire and like just, thinking, okay, yep, now it's dry. I've got it in the right way. Flick, 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 nothing. And you really feel for Dwayne here. And this is where it is in nature, the highs and the lows and how, I guess, vulnerable you are to, the smallest thing can tip your mood significantly. And the poor guy couldn't get a fire in that moment. The high of catching the fish and then not being able to cook it would definitely have a huge toll. And then he goes full Gollum on it. He eats it raw, and that's just so impressive. I mean, geez, not sure I would have been able to do that. And then he just has that statement of, "What am I doing here?" And I think that was something that went through certainly my head, definitely at times. You have these plans before you go out there, and you think, "Oh, I'll do this, I'll do that, and do this," and then you start to try and do those things, and it feels like every angle often you're getting blocked. And it's really hard to maintain that enthusiasm for these cool projects that you've had planned. Then we see Dwayne with his beautiful axe, and he carves like the bay and all the sort of, on one side of the axe is all about the beautiful landscape that he's in, and then on the other side is the hardships of being alone, and that starts to really ring true, I think, to him, and he starts to realize that we need our people, we need our connections to live in a land, and that's what the First Nations people would have done. And to be solitary in an environment like that it just doesn't make sense, and it's not natural, and that certainly starts to well up in him more and more, I think. And then he has the experience with the raven, which is his wife's totem, and that sort of is quite beautiful. And when he speaks about that, I just get chills, and that signals for him it's time to go home, and I think that's beautiful. So we jump to Mike and his paddy melon chasing, and we see a little bit of that sort of mindset that definitely happens when you're out there and you start to think, oh, okay, well, if I can catch one paddy melon a week, and you start to sort of calculate it, it's like, counting your chickens. But I mean, you do that. That's exactly what you do. And yeah, hopefully he gets a hold of that poor paddy melon. A really interesting point Mike makes is he doesn't need a fire. There's no requirement for a fire unless you're trying to cook something. There was a fair bit of rain out there, and yeah, he was catching it in his gumboot. A really beautiful thing about the rain, when it was raining, it's like, okay, cool, I don't have to have a fire. I tended to have one more for morale, sitting there watching the fire. It's just sort of warm my emotional cup. So that was something that I chose to do. I was harvesting water off my shelter, but definitely the emotional kick I got out of having a little fire every night. It was part of my routine, which I found really important. We see Mike harvesting the stringy bark there, and that's really cool to see. And he makes a comment that he's only harvesting a third of the plant so that it will regrow and it won't damage the tree permanently. I think he's going to sort of flick it up above his fireplace to shelter that from rain when he gets that paddy melon. Then we flick to Michael, lovely Michael. I sat next to Michael in boot camp, and I actually grew really fond of him. He's quirky, he's crazy, but I absolutely have a soft spot for Michael. Hopefully everyone will grow to love him. He hasn't had much airtime, unfortunately, and I love him sort of bouncing around, talking to the different cameras, and I think he's funny. He's a really interesting guy, and I'm excited to see his journey. He gets I think it's the backpack cover, and he fills it with water, puts water in there, and then he puts rocks in the fire, and then he grabs the rocks and chucks it in the water, and it warms the water. And it's a really cool method that I've read about, but I've never personally done. So it's fun to see Michael working with that, and he has a little bath. This is the washing episode, isn't it? I think, what is it? Gina gets her kid off and has a bit of an air out, and then Michael has a bath. Dwayne has a swim. and someone else does something. Yeah, Chris went for a swim, and then actually when it fixed to my episode, I've got my bush soap and I'm having a bit of a scrubby dub dubs. I had that cute little scene, I think, where I found some dogwood toilet paper, and so I really enjoyed, I guess, looking after my personal hygiene out there. And so that was something that I was interested in doing, is finding these plants that could help me in certain ways. And then the next scene, I think, is me. I had all these cuts on my fingers, and I don't know, it was like my office worker hands, but I think it was the wet weather and hard work and probably, lack of food, but my fingers just split. I had cuts and just all these nicks all over my fingers. Like I was covered in cuts, and they were a bit yucky, in that environment, that wet and rainforest environment. I really started to worry about them. And so, yeah, I'd read about the Palawa people using the crosier, so that kind of like that little curly part of the frond, and yeah, crushing it up. And so there's this beautiful little scene of me, river rocks, crushing it up and then putting it on my fingers. And it was like betadine. It kind of stained it brown, and yeah, it worked a treat. So I was really happy that made it to camera, because you're tinkering with all this crazy stuff each day, and you wonder what will make the cut, what won't. And so it is beautiful for me personally, as someone who has such respect for our First Nations people and the way they lived with the land, and they knew where the medicine plants were. They knew where the, they just had such an amazing depth of knowledge. Then I fixed to my little finding the acacia and the soap, and I doubled down on that soap. I used it so much. I washed everything. And I think there's a comment about any day that I make my life out there a little bit more comfortable is a good day, and trying to celebrate those wins. It's like, yes, today I've got soap. That's huge. I love that they included the discussion I was having about not being allowed to be a Cub Scout, and how my mum marched down there and told them that, that's not fair, and they still wouldn't let me join, because that did have a profound impact on me. And I felt like, oh, well, my brother's allowed to do it. That's a boy's activity. And even though I was so interested in it, and he'd bring back his homework from Cub Scouts and I'd be like learning off him, it really did signal to me early that the outdoors is a space for men and not women. And that was hard, because I felt so drawn to that space. It just didn't quite make sense in my little, 8-year-old brain. And I think that's where I got a huge passion, that I don't want there to be barriers for women in the outdoor space. And that's one of the most enriching things about my YouTube channel in particular, is the women that reach out to me and say that, I've helped them in some small way get outdoors. And that fuels my passion. And that's just so beautiful to hear. And I hope we keep making advances in that space and seeing more and more women in the outdoors. And I think there still is a lot of progress we need to make, because, I look at, say, my young cousin, and she still feels that pressure, that stigma, and that, silly little girl, like, what are you doing out here? And that's just not fair, because there's so much to be gained personally in terms of confidence and skills outdoors. And if women aren't, afforded that amazing experience, then they're missing out. There's a lovely quote they included that I said, nature warms my heart and makes me feel so emotional. And I think in a world where sometimes emotions can be frowned upon, I do love my emotions. I love crying, happy or sad tears. It is so beautiful to be in a space where you can just let down any potential barriers or guards that you've got up, and just feel happy, feel sad. And that's so beautiful about nature. Certainly once I started there, I didn't love the environment, but I grew to love it. I grew to appreciate the small things, those little mushrooms and the mosses. And it was just such an incredible experience to spend so long in one place and get to know it so well. Thanks for watching. That's episode 5. I can't wait to watch episode 6. Cheers.